Now we come to our third, or to my third and last guilty pleasure, Last House on the Left, which I have to say is an extremely violent and unsavory thriller that came out in the early 1970s, was attacked or dismissed by almost every critic I know of. If I remember correctly, Gene, you said that it was moral, disgusting, and depraved.
Those were some of my kinder remarks.
Okay. And yet I felt the movie had an unusual power and impact. 1973, at a time when movie violence was so commonplace that we hardly even noticed it, here was a movie with a genuine visceral power to shock, a movie in which the violence was as graphic and real so that we just couldn't dismiss it as only a movie. Last House on the Left is about two teenage girls who are kidnapped by a gang of sadistic killers. One of the girls escapes, but she doesn't get very far. We didn't have to show you that scene, but we did to make a point. Every week in this country on primetime television there are scores of stabbings, shootings, gougings, violent murders. And somehow they never touch us, or at least they never really touch me, but this movie does. And that scene goes on to make it get a lot worse. The girl is stabbed in the back, and the look on her face will never leave me. And that's an example of the crude but very effective power that Last House on the Left had to really shock and startle us. And in its seriousness, its relentlessly despairing view of human nature, the raw power of its images, Last House on the Left was a more powerful and skillful film than a lot of the 70s more respectable thrillers. It didn't compromise.
Well, it certainly didn't change tones. It was consistent, I'll grant you that. In my review, I dumped all over the picture. I hated it.
Yeah,
I thought it luxuriated in its violence and was sort of sick in its own way for that reason. At the same time, I hear you now, clearer than I heard you when you reviewed it years ago, because what you seem to be saying is just what I got through saying with Superfly, which is that it's an unsavory subject, drug pushing in one case, here a stabbing rapist, and yet it's treated real and done well. Does that make it a bad movie? A rotten subject, but done well. I don't think it's necessarily a bad movie.
Here's an example of that, where people say because the subject is bad, the movie is bad. This movie, Last House on the Left, curiously enough, from beginning to end, is a scene-by-scene remake of The Virgin Spring by Ingmar Bergman, one of the great films of 1958. And that film is, I think, officially considered to be art. I certainly consider it to be a very good film. This film is often, people dismiss it as garbage. Well, it's the same subject, so you get into a very tricky shadow area there.
Okay, I accept your intellectual argument. I think this specific case, it may be garbage. Okay. We disagree. Okay.
And Last House on the Left was the violent, cynical, disturbingly effective modern thriller.
My next choice is a movie that I gave a good review to way back in 1972, and to this day, people still ask me if I really gave 3.5 stars to Last House on the Left. The answer is yes, I really do think this is a good movie. It's crude, it's violent, it's frightening, but it's one of the most effective horror films of recent years. The movie tells the story of a gang of homicidal maniacs who murder two young women and then coincidentally end up spending the night in the home of the parents of one of their victims. One interesting touch is that one member of the gang is as horrified by their crimes as we are. In the movie's bloodthirsty climax, the father uses a bizarre Rube Goldberg plan to fight back against these killers. If the plot of Last House on the Left sounds at all familiar, that may be because this low-budget American horror film is based on a famous film called The Virgin Spring, a 1959 classic by the great Swedish director Ingmar Bergman. Bergman set his story in medieval times, but Wes Craven, who directed Last House, moves it up to the contemporary suburbs and tells it with a flat, realistic style that's all the more effective. Slasher movies usually offend me because nobody in them seems to believe the evil is real. In this movie, they do.
I like the idea of a film that has a flat kind of horror to it. In fact, the next one that I'm going to recommend is precisely that. I just thought this picture went over the top. I was repulsed by it. It didn't, that can happen, and it happened to me. It's simply that. I thought it was really crude and didn't have a sense of spirit.
For example, there
shouldn't be anything joyful about a murdering gang of thugs.
But there was something really desperate about a scene at the end of the movie where the father uses that Rube Goldberg device I was talking about. He's trying to electrify one of the killers, and he's got a combination of electricity and a screen door and some shaving cream. And to me, there was something really impressive about the lengths to which he was willing to go, the desperation of somebody in that situation.
I was turned off from the film well before that at point. I just thought it was just overdone, and I didn't see anything artful about the method of the killing and the way it was shot.